Hey, functional friends, Bren Vermeyer here. Welcome to the Holistic Savage podcast, where we like to talk about all things related to functional health, including functional medicine, functional fitness, functional spirituality, functional psychology, and basically everything in between. And of course, you can't spell functional without fun, so we like to have a good time on this show. Now, before we get started with introducing today's honored guest, I want to remind you all that the content of this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not at all intended to be a replacement for supervised healthcare. So be sure that you're working proactively with your licensed healthcare provider to make sure that all of your healthcare and medical needs are being met effectively. Of course, if you're interested in our functional services at Metabolic Solutions, you can send us an email at info@metabolicsolutionsllc.com, and of course, visit our website, metabolicsolutionsllc.com. Also, if you love this podcast, I would really appreciate it if you share it with your family and friends. Like it, follow us, subscribe, review. It really means the world because ultimately, I believe that the greatest medicine of all is to teach people how not to need it. And the first step towards change is awareness and then education and empowerment. So that is what my platform is dedicated to. That's what this podcast is dedicated to, is helping educate and empower self-healers around the world so that they can overcome their greatest health objectives. So be sure to subscribe and leave us a positive review, and don't forget to share with your loved ones. So without further ado, let's get started with today's guest. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome back, functional friends, to the Holistic Savage podcast, where we like to talk about all things related to functional medicine, functional fitness, functional spirituality, functional psychology, and everything in between. And keep in mind, you can't spell functional without fun. So we have to always have a lot of fun with what we do. Otherwise, what's the point? So today I am so excited to welcome Dr. Mindy Pelz to the Holistic Savage podcast. So please allow me to formally introduce my friend. So Dr. Mindy Pelz is empowering people all over the world to believe in their body's own healing abilities through fasting, diet variation, removing chemicals from the body, and so much more. Dr. Mindy is recognized as a leader in the alternative health world and is the founder of Family Life Wellness, her local clinic that is made to speed up healing and maximize performance. She is also the founder of the Reset Academy, a private group where she and her team help people implement the principles of fasting, keto, and diet variation into their daily lives. She is the host of one of the leading science podcasts, the Resetter podcast, which actually I have been featured on, and it was an absolute honor and privilege to be a guest on her show. And she's also the author of 3 best-selling books, The Menopause Reset, The Reset Factor, and The Reset Kitchen. Dr. Mindy and I actually connected through social media in 2020. We instantly hit it off. We were instant functional friends. And so I couldn't be more excited to have the opportunity to share her aura, her wisdom, and her knowledge with you all today. All right, functional friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Holistic Savage podcast. So today I am very excited to have my functional friend and returning guest, Dr. Will Cole, back onto the show as we're going to be talking about intuitive fasting. So please allow me to formally introduce my friend. Dr. Will Cole is a leading functional medicine expert and consults with people around the world via webcam and locally in Pittsburgh. He specializes in clinically investigating underlying factors of chronic disease and customizing health programs for thyroid issues, autoimmune conditions, hormonal dysfunctions, digestive disorders, and brain problems. Dr. Cole was named one of the top 50 functional medicine and integrative doctors in the nation and is a health expert and course instructor for the world's largest wellness brands such as Mind, Body Green, and Goop. So it's really an honor to have Dr. Will Cole back on the show. He first joined us in a previous season and we talked about all sorts of amazing nutrition related topics, but today we are talking about intuitive fasting. So let's get started with the show. round 3 coming up with Dr. Jess Petros. Excuse me. Just burping over here. All right. Hey, functional friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Holistic Savage podcast. I couldn't be more excited to introduce my good friend, Dr. Jess Petros, who is coming on to the podcast, and we're going to be talking all about naughty microbes and toxic loads. So please allow me to formally introduce Dr. Jess, who is a former hospitalist, internal medicine-based medical doctor, and a certified Gerson practitioner. She is an expert in the areas of stealth infections, environmental toxicity, regenerative medicine, ozone, and cannabis. Her passion lies in uncovering the mystery behind the chronic illness, whether that be stealth infections, heavy metals, stress, trauma, or other environmental toxicities. There are real root cause answers for why the body might be malfunctioning. Trained in medicine at the University of Louisville, Dr. Jess experienced what many of her patients experienced: deep anxiety, hormonal imbalances, and adrenal dysfunction. She sought answers to uncover the root cause of disease, something she thought she had learned in medical school. After working as an MD in a hospital for 6 years, Dr. Jess realized that she needed to investigate alternatives to today's modern medical industry, which treats every ill with a pill. She became trained in Gerson therapy, functional medicine, nutrigenomics, and ozone in her efforts to help her patients with chronic disease solutions. She now is an expert in the field of Lyme, parasites, and the health hazards of mold. She is an international keynote speaker with her own former line of Dr. Jess products. Recently, Dr. Jess made the choice to not continue her board certification with the AMA, as she no longer practices pharmaceutical-based medicine and is able to get to the root cause to heal people without the need for narcotics, immunosuppressants, antidepressants, antibiotics, or steroids. So it is such a pleasure to have Dr. Jess on the podcast. She and I have been running in the same circles and groups for quite a while, and it was just a matter of time before we became functional besties. So let's go ahead and get started with this amazing show. Welcome back, everybody, to the Holistic Savage podcast, where we like to talk about everything related to functional health, including functional medicine, psychology, spirituality, and everything in between. So today I have a very special guest with Dr. Mindy Pelz, who is a true leader, an expert and educator in the functional medicine, holistic health space. And I was honored to be on her podcast, the Resetter podcast, recently, and I had such a good time with her and we jived so well. I was like, I have to get her on my podcast. So Dr. Mindy, thank you so much for joining me. It's truly an honor to have the opportunity to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I agree. I really enjoyed our conversation, and we've gotten incredible feedback from our Resetter community. So thank you for having me. I love talking about fasting. Anytime we can talk about fasting and autophagy, I've been diving into the science this week on autophagy and immunity. So I'm excited to be here sharing it with you and chatting with you.
Oh, absolutely. This can be fun. I can feel it because, I'm so impressed by your platform, your community, and certainly will tell everybody and include in the show notes where they can learn from you and join your community, because I see the content that you're pouring out, and certainly having my own platform, I know how much work and
It
commitment
takes a
it really
lot.
takes to
Yeah.
do that. And so what you're doing for the world, it's just so needed. It's so powerful. And I see a lot of your work and content focusing around, the art and science of fasting and some of the health benefits. And so certainly, as we touched on in your podcast, there is so much scientific literature coming out
Yep.
on the health benefits related to fasting. So I'm excited to, dive into that and sort that out a little bit. But to kind of start the conversation before we get too lost down the rabbit hole of autophagy, I'd love to kind of hear from you a little bit of like how you really got into fasting and why this is such a big focal point of the work you do with your community and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm 51 now, and when I turned 40, I was probably your classic health fanatic. I exercised a ton, and I ate really good food, and I ate 6 meals a day, and I took my supplements. I got chiropractic, acupuncture, like got out into nature. Like I did everything that you were supposed to do to stay healthy. And really the focus then was, what did the scale say? And was I staying off of medication and out of the traditional doctor's office? Like those were sort of my highlights and focus that I had. And then when I turned 43, my hormones shifted and all the old tricks stopped working. And I started not sleeping. I started, typical like perimenopausal woman having hot flashes, anxiety, depression kicked in. And so I took all those old habits that I was doing and I just did more of them. I was like, I need to run a little further. I was like, all of a sudden, I was holding on to weight and I didn't really enjoy that. So I dove into the science. I mean, that's always my go to place. Like, go to PubMed and start looking at what the research is saying. And intermittent fasting was coming out about that time. And the first time I heard about intermittent fasting, I thought, oh, yeah, I could do that for a day. Like, it was like, yeah, I'll do that one day. And then when I read, oh, no, you're supposed to do it every day, I was like, what? So I actually was very resistant to get into the fasting because I was hypoglycemic if I didn't eat. I was ate the same breakfast for probably 20 years. Like I was the smoothie gal. I'd walk around with a smoothie all day long. And now I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, thank God I really jumped into fasting because there's so many miracles there. And I really went into it with massive reluctance. And now, it's like my whole lifestyle.
It's amazing, and there's always something valuable to learn by leaning into resistance, right? Like whatever
Yep.
it is that we're resistant or reluctant to look at or do, there's always something to learn there. So I love
So
that you kind
true.
of force yourself to dig into that more. And I think your story and what you just shared is so powerful, and I'm sure that so many people can relate to that, where hey, I was very health conscious, I was doing all the right things, I had the fundamentals, and then all of a sudden things start changing, and those
Yep.
tricks aren't working. So how do we kind of unstuck ourselves? And so, with fasting, which we briefly chatted about on your show, it's really interesting how the science kind of always leads us back to nature, and in some ways what maybe should be common sense and maybe what once was common sense, but then we have to like unlearn some of these bad habits. And so a lot of times I like to kind of zoom out to look at history
Mm,
and the big picture of like, well, how did we get here? How did we
right.
get to this place where 88% of Americans are metabolically ill, 70% are overweight and obese, half the population is diabetic or pre-diabetic? And then it's like, well, remember that food pyramid, right? Of,
Yep.
11 servings of heart healthy grains per day. And if you're skipping meals, you have an eating disorder. And it's like, maybe some of that backfired, because then now all of this new science supporting all of these health benefits related to sometimes not eating,
Yep.
right? And allowing your body to do something. So let's kind of segue that into, what would you say, kind of 1,000-foot view, are some of the major healing and health promoting effects of fasting?
Yeah, for sure. The easiest way I can explain it is you have to think of it like you have two energy sources, two different ways your body is going to get energy. One is from sugar, and I kind of don't necessarily like the sugar burner message because people think, oh, I just get off sugar and now I'm not a sugar burner. So when I say you are getting energy from sugar, I mean you're eating all day long. You're never going into a fasted state. So we have this one energy source over here that makes us sugar burners, and then we have this other like reserve energy source that only can be tapped into when we don't eat, and we call this fat burner. So, or I call it fat, but it's like ketones, ketosis, ketones, like what you could give it a lot of different names. But here's what we're supposed to be doing is we're supposed to be eating and then not eating and then eating and not eating. So we could go in and out of these two states. And it's just like way back in the caveman days. We didn't have refrigeration, we didn't have access to food all the time. So, this alternative energy source became so important for us back in the caveman days. We haven't accessed it because food is everywhere now. So, in the basic premise of fasting, what you're doing is you're going and you're accessing this other fuel source that you didn't even know was there. And it's like to me, it's like a treasure box that once you identify it, you're like, oh, what's in here? Okay, well, gosh, my cells can start to heal and repair themselves. I can kill off bacteria. I can make something called ketones, and ketones will go up into my brain and they'll start to regenerate neurons. I can start finally burning that fat that I didn't even know I wasn't accessing by eating all day. Like, it's just a treasure of mechanisms that happen when we take food out of the equation. And the problem is that we've been over here fighting what food, which diet. And what I love about fasting is we have to change the conversation and say it's not so much about which diet, it's about how often you're eating.
I love that. And so certainly this is where, being metabolically flexible, which if we and this kind of gets back to like my point about common sense of like, well, if we as a species, as an organism, had to just constantly have fuel going down our face, 3 to 6 times every single day, how on earth did we last this long? What did we do when
Yes.
we were hunter gatherers and we didn't have the ice box and we didn't have, the loaf of bread sitting there and we had to, go hunt and gather for every meal or whatnot. And of course, looking at like body composition, if we can store what, like 200 grams of glycogen in the liver, maybe another few hundred in the skeletal muscle, but that's trapped in there. But then we have all this body fat and more
Yep.
today than ever. It's like, well, so then how do we tap more into that? So
Exactly.
you touched on it there of kind of the sugar burner, fat burner, metabolic flexibility. And like back in the day when I first started my career as a personal trainer, we had VO2 testing, which was super cool.
Mm.
We could measure their oxygen, CO2, and create that respiratory quotient. And so I remember like, zero point 0.7 respiratory quotient kind of represented like true fat burning. 1.0 was like your anaerobic threshold and you're just full on glycolytic sugar burning. But I'd love to, before we go too in depth with some of the mechanisms and stuff which you touched on, which are super exciting. What causes people, to move away from like our innate ability to tap into all that body fat and be metabolically flexible? Like, how did we get into this kind of sugar burner where we are just, oh gosh, I can't go more than 2-3 hours without eating? What
Yep.
causes us to shift away from being metabolically flexible?
Yeah. It's Kellogg's fault. Have you
Yeah.
that's the simple answer.
Yeah.
Um, the reason we all think that breakfast is the most important meal of the day is because it was the ad campaign for cornflakes when cornflakes came out for Kellogg's way back in the 60s, I think. So we have been hammered with that message. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. We've also been hammered with the message: the more you eat, the faster your metabolism. And we have are if you're not conscious about the food you're eating, you're literally eating food that was designed to make you more hungry and make you more addicted to it. So to me, it's the messaging that we've got mixed with the poor quality of food. what we're eating today is so different than what I grew up in the 70s. It's so much different than the food we ate in the 70s. And it really has, like, it's like the world has shifted, but our messaging didn't.
Hmm.
And so now people are operating with the wrong messaging, and they're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So we've got to flip the paradigm upside down. And I'm like such a fan of, like, let's stop fighting about what to eat, because some of people can do so well on a vegan and other people are going to just kick butt on a carnivore diet. And some people need to do keto variations. But there's room for us to do all of that. And let's just start with the conversation of how often are you eating, and are you compressing your eating window so you have a fat? To me, I look at my day is always a fasting window and an eating window. And how long am I going to fast? And I determine how long I'm going to fast based off of whatever I'm trying mechanism I want to initiate in my body. And then when I eat, I look at, okay, what quality of food do I want to eat to support a healthy functioning body? So it's that the messaging has been wrong.
I'm really glad that you said that so candidly, because I'm a very kind of at times like cutthroat, candid dude, and I think to really kind of lead people to the light or whatever, like we have to have that bigger conversation of the political and financial interest, because it's really no mystery like where we went wrong or what went wrong, everywhere Kellogg's and big agriculture and big sugar goes, right? Like it's America that has all these problems now, and anywhere that that food industry goes, we see the same metabolic disease
Yep.
manifestation
So
elsewhere.
true.
So yeah, I mean and I always like to think about how, since it's 2020, you know, the Great Depression was 100 years ago. Now, I wasn't alive back then, obviously, but I imagine, fresh meat from the butcher and raw milk from the cow and fresh produce. We didn't have glyphosate. We didn't have all the
Yeah.
tilling agriculture. We didn't have, Kellogg's and the 11 servings of grain supposed to make up our diet, as said by the, American Heart Association, right? So, certainly we have to look at the science versus kind of the political financial interests. I think that was
Yeah.
really well said.
I read an article when I was fresh out of undergraduate school, and it was I lived in LA for a good part of my life, and it was in the LA Times, and it was like this huge, when we were all reading newspapers back then, and it was like this, 3-page article, which you never would see. They were always short. And it was all about how the food industry will actually, like, the executives will get around a board table and they will say, what is it that stimulates our appetite, and what is it that we can do to get people to eat more of our food? And the article went on to talk about the potato chip, and that what they know about potato chips is they're very light and airy, but if they spray it with certain chemicals and they make it nice and salty, it actually shuts off the part of your brain that registers you're full. So they designed the potato chip so you can't just eat one, you eat the whole bag, because there's nothing, your taste buds are like, amazing, this is incredible. And you're addicted to it, and nothing tells the brain to stop eating it. And it just becomes incredibly difficult to stop. And
Hmm.
when I read that, I was like, the food, wait, this is like food in my grocery store that they're trying to figure out how I can eat more of. That's crazy. And that was back in like the 1990s.
Oof.
That right? Now it's just, and glyphosate wasn't even a discussion back then. And now it's just spun out of control because the food, it's profits over people, and it's really sad.
It really is. And I I like to think that we didn't create this chronic disease epidemic pandemic intentionally. I like to think that it's like, well, this wasn't necessarily by design, but you kind of look at the rise of big agriculture and then big pharma and all the connections there and how that's influencing university curriculum. It's just like we're sort of at this critical stage right now where we're all sort of scratching our heads like something is not right here. And
Yep.
obviously with the pandemic going on currently, and there's such a focus on that, but there's not a big conversation on how can we just be more metabolically resilient and healthy. So I don't know, it's this huge problem where, yeah, we were doing that, right? Of trying to figure out how to create, recurrent consumers and customers with this addictive food, but then that makes them fat and unhealthy. And well, that's good business for big pharma and healthcare.
Yep.
And then all the while, the general population starting to realize, like, whoa, guys, like we're all pretty sick. Who's not on multiple medications? So,
Yep.
what in your eyes do you think we need to do to really start? I mean, obviously this is what you're doing professionally, but how can we begin to change that narrative and change that messaging?
Yeah, that's such a great point. And this is honestly why I love fasting, because if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, but I'm addicted to food, which a lot of people are. And I have such respect for overcoming those addictions because, again, if the food industry has tied you, has made sure you stay addicted. Um, but what I like to do is start with, let's just change the way we look at a 24-hour period when it comes to food. And like I said before, there should be a fasting period and there should be an eating period. And so most people are only fasting maybe 8 hours at the most when they sleep. But there's no mechanisms that get like that get initiated with 8 hours of fasting. The first set of healing processes that show up are at about 13 to 15 hours. So I feel like if we get everybody, if we just start with intermittent fasting, we got everybody, we said, don't worry about your diet. Just let's start by doing intermittent fasting with you. We would start to make that slow journey over to fat burner. We would start to get, I love the way you said it, like metabolic illness. Like we have so much metabolic illness. We would start to make getting the public over into becoming more metabolically fit. And I'm like you, like this year I was like, what the heck is going on? How is everybody so immune compromised? And I still feel like that question is not being well addressed. It's still a question of virulence of the virus. And I want to, again, let's change the discussion. What about the people? How do we keep the people strong? And that starts with intermittent fasting, in my opinion, because you start the healing process when you can go 13 to 15 hours without food.
Absolutely. And that metabolic resilience that unfortunately our population is severely lacking, and a big part of why the
Yeah.
United States is just really struggling with the just uncontrolled spread.
Yeah.
Um, I really, not that I've been horribly plugged in, but I really have only heard one thing from a certain government official that did point out, like, well, we have to socially distance, we have to do all this because we are such an ill population that it'll just tear
Mm,
through us, right?
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's but unfortunately there's no mass government education on, well, how can we start building up that metabolic health. And of course so many aspects of our current situation are not helpful for metabolic health or immune health. Of even just social isolation is
Yep.
not really so much
No.
health promoting at all.
Horrible. Yeah. No, you know what? I finally decided because the first 3 months of this pandemic, I was like, a part of me was like, oh my God, everybody's focused on their health. This is amazing. Like those of us in the health field, we've been trying to get people to wake up and focus on their health forever. But then as the pandemic went on, I started to look at like, why don't we have any of the leadership in this country talking about what we can do or not do with our lifestyle to make ourselves more immune strong. And so I started teaching my resetters that when if you have to put the mask on, just use it as a reminder that you're putting the mask on and you're keeping the crap out. Like it's a signal that we don't need to put the junk in, that you use it for whichever way you feel comfortable using it, but also remind yourself every single time that there's never been a more important time to keep the junk out. And I'm hoping that message will get out a little bit more, especially as we go into the winter. Um, but it takes like a whole bunch of us screaming it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and then of course the censorship, which whew, don't
Oh,
even
it's
start on that.
ridiculous.
But
Yeah.
I've done a little bit of traveling this year, not nearly as much as previous years, but it was a little disturbing to get on the airplane and forcing the mask and nobody occupying the middle seat, and everybody masked up and all of that. But then as soon as those free Cheez Its or pretzels
Oh,
or
yes.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
and people are
Yeah.
taking their mask off to num 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 num.
Yes. It's so true. And that's where I'm like, this is illogical. Like, logic would say there's a virus moving through town, let's get everybody strong. We do it when a storm moves in. Anybody's ever lived on a tropical island? My husband grew up on the island of Guam. And when they know that there's going to be a typhoon or a big storm coming through, they put storm shutters up and they get the houses ready for a storm like that. Why didn't we get the people ready? Like, masking it's almost like we can come over here and debate the vegan, carnivore, or we can all just look at fasting and go, hey, you know what, there's so many cool things about fasting. You do you on the eating style, and we can all fast together. I feel like that with the masking. Like, okay, fine, whatever. There's a lot of peer-reviewed journals saying that it's good. There's some saying it's not. It's very controversial. Which is silly. But let's stop arguing about that, and let's come over here and maybe we could look at like the research on vitamin D. Or how about we look at the research which I did for my YouTube this week on autophagy? That stimulating autophagy has this whole viral immunity like component to it. How about we put our efforts over there? And that's what's killing me, is that we're not doing that.
Absolutely. And so that perfect segue, because I want to chat about autophagy a little bit, which I've been reading up on a lot too. And holy cow, the way that autophagy helps regulate the inflammatory response and immune response is super complex, super fascinating. So
Super
for,
complex. Yep.
for the listeners, how would you describe autophagy, which seems kind of be like the main mechanism we care about, would you say?
Yeah. I've the trendy description of it is it is either self detox or self repair. But I feel like that is too trite, because it's like you said, it's such a complicated system. So this is the way I like to explain it, that there's two types of autophagy. One is what they call xenoautophagy, which is where the intelligence of the cell gets triggered, and so it starts to go after bacteria, fungi, and viruses, and it spits those out of the cell, kills them out before they can do any damage inside the cell to the proteins and organelles that are inside that. So that's fabulous, and that's really helpful for what we got going on right now. And then the second one is what they call macroautophagy, which is where the cellular intelligence looks around at the cell and it goes, you know what? There's a lot of things not working in this cell. I better tidy up. I better clean up. And in some cases, it will create something called apoptosis, where it actually kills the cell because it goes, this cell is really dysfunctional. If I don't kill it, it's going to replicate into a cancer cell, or it's going to take over the host. So it's like this internal mechanism that is always working in our advantage. And yet it should happen naturally, kind of ebb and flow throughout the day. And as we age, as we get more exposure to poor foods, like we were talking about, you actually get more dysfunction of autophagy. And this is why we have an immune compromised world. I mean, at the basic level, we have cellular inflammation. We have a system that's not registering viruses because those cells have never had the opportunity to keep this autophagy mechanism at the highest state possible. And fasting is the best way that I know to really bring back the function of autophagy to your cells.
That was a beautiful description. And I think autophagy and some of the sciencey stuff can be intimidating or daunting, but when you kind of look, and as you so eloquently broke it down, you start kind of seeing like, wow, like the innate intelligence of the body and how it has our back if we
Yep.
are treating it right. And in a lot of ways, so you mentioned how it's that cellular cleanup. So Let's clean out these. Sometimes the cell just needs to be scrapped, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
let's
Sometimes
this
it's not
one
good. Yeah.
let's kind of beat up. Let's just kill it off, apoptosis, or this organelle, like it's kind of dysfunctional. Let's just clean that up. But also, as you said, autophagy helping with the immune and inflammatory response against pathogens, right? Which you kind of think about it like when you get sick and you have a fever, you're usually not very hungry when you're burning up, and kind of
It's a
that whole
great point.
starve a fever sort of thing. It's like, well,
Yep.
what are we doing there? Kind of
Yep.
starvation to induce the autophagy so that your body can focus on doing that cleanup, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like animals do the same, right? When they're sick, they don't eat. But we don't tap into that as much as we could. And why wait till you're sick? Why don't you do it now so you can stimulate that process and constantly being repairing yourself? And if we go back to just the idea that everybody's so focused on germs right now, but we're built so well.
Mhm.
And we have an intelligence that knows how to fight these germs. The question is your intelligence working at its best? And if you've been eating all day, you're missing out on this autophagy state. So it's time to start to learn how to stimulate that. And
Mhm.
that's what I'm trying to teach people is it doesn't take money. You could be a busy CEO, you can be completely broke. What I love about it is we can all do it. We can all do it. We had like in our resetter tribe, we actually had a man reach out to us from Australia who was the leader of an Aboriginal tribe. And the tribe had same thing we were talking about, where a bunch of the junk food had gotten into the area where the communities where they were living, and found out that diabetes was on the rise. I mean, this happens to our indigenous people here in America so much. And he started showing them my YouTube videos, and he started teaching them fasting, and they started losing weight and getting off medication. I mean, they're a very poor Aboriginal tribe that's living on the edge of a city that grew over their homeland, and we got them fasting, and their body started healing. So there's no excuse to not fast.
Yeah, it's so amazing and so cool, and it's like for the majority of humans existing on Earth, we didn't have the luxury of constant food abundance. So we didn't have to learn these lessons. It was what it was, and our body
Yep.
did what it did. We didn't understand it. We didn't know all of that was going on. But then as we entered, modernized times of agriculture and food abundance and constant availability and the messaging of you should constantly be eating lots of heart healthy whole grains, but now we're
Mm.
having to learn that lesson, which is really unlearning all of this, false beliefs that we've been domesticated into. And as you're saying, hey, like it's no fancy, crazy, sexy diet. It's just working with the way nature wanted you to work,
That's
which
right.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all so much for listening to the Holistic Savage podcast. We on the Holistic Savage team all really appreciate you and want to stay connected with you. So please rate, review, and subscribe to help the podcast grow. And if you like the podcast, help get the word out. And now, back to the show.
makes perfect sense. If you're, again, hunter gatherer, there's no food available, but also, if you're hunting and gathering, you're probably going to get a cut here and there or pick up a bug here and there. So being able to have that robust response against it, or it's recycling, right? The body is amazingly efficient. So it's like, oh,
Absolutely.
well, this thing isn't working that well anyways. Let's break that down into amino acids to feed the amino acid pool and have some energy reservoir, while now let's tap into all that body fat that you've been building up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing that I think we've gotten so off course with, even in the alternative healthcare system. If we look at, and I don't even call our healthcare system right now a healthcare system, it's a sick care
Mhm.
system. And the rules, if you're going to play in that system, the rules are you have a symptom, you take a pill, or you do a surgery. If it doesn't go away, you take another pill, you do another surgery. And then when people get tired of that system, and they want to step out of it, they come over to the natural world, which is more healthcare, but they forget you can't bring that paradigm with you. You can't go, okay, instead of taking an Advil for my pain, I'm going to take some magic turmeric herb that will bring the pain down and the inflammation down. Now, I'm not saying that that's not good. There's less side effects to that than there is to the medication. But what I'm really trying to get out to people is that when you decide you don't want to play in the sick care system anymore, what I would encourage you to do is to get to know yourself again, because you were built with an intelligence inside of you. And let's start with the foundation, which is, what do quality of food, when you eat, how are you sleeping, how are you exercising? Like, these things don't cost money. If we make it so that the alternative health world is just going to have to cost people a ton of money, then they're going to stay, on the edge of sick care. So we got to go back to foundational ways in which the human body wanted to be treated. And I feel like that's the beautiful thing, like the paleo world did, and the hunter gatherer world, and even the ketogenic world. It's like these diets that emerged were like, hey, when we eat this way, there's a different process that kicks in our body. And then people start to get to know themselves again.
I love that. And I think it's so valuable and powerful, especially hearing, a doctor say that, because certainly, you know, I think I mentioned this on your show. Unfortunately, in the something I see all the time is people kind of coming, and what they really want to do is, do all the fancy testing. Well, what
Yep.
protocol do I do? What supplement do I take? And that's after they've already kind of done their rounds through conventional. And of course, it's like, yeah, that's cool sometimes and needed sometimes, but uh, all the testing, all the protocols in the world doesn't really get you very far if those fundamentals are not in place. And when you
Yep.
look at what all of the expert, like, instead of looking at what the experts are saying differently, if you look at the commonality of what are all the experts and leaders saying, they're all saying the same things: the
Yep.
sleep hygiene, the stress reduction, the nutrition, so on, the exercise, so on and so forth. So I think it is just so crucial that we have to build that foundation before we can, build our majesty and palace and everything.
Yeah, because I'm sure you've seen this with patients, clients before. Like, you give them a supplement, and then they do the same paradigm. They come back and they're like, "Oh, the supplement didn't work." We do it even with the diet. Like, I
Mhm.
mean, in my Resetter collaborative on Facebook, we got people arguing vegan over carnivore, and I'm like, "Okay, everybody, there's a path. There's a time to do vegan. There's a time to do carnivore. There's a path for everybody." But we have to stop looking at these one-offs
Mhm.
and start to go, okay, what's the foundational lifestyle tools that I need to put into place? My book, Menopause Reset. I had a bunch of my community ask me to write it, and I was like, oh, at the time I decided to write it, which was a year ago. Like, when you looked around the world, at the menopausal world, it's all gimmicks and, magic mushrooms and little things you can do to help the symptoms. And I was like, I don't want to create another magic mushroom book. I want women to know there's a lifestyle that should accompany the changes in your hormones. And so once I got clear that that was going to be the way I would go after this massive topic of menopause, I found it really that it's women are really resonating with it, because it gives you control back, and it takes us off this roller coaster of what's the right thing. It lets you go within and decide what's the right thing for you, and it needs to start with lifestyle.
Absolutely. Very powerful. So with fasting and autophagy, you mentioned it before, of like, okay, how do we harness that healing process of autophagy? What would your stance be on, how long does somebody need to fast, or consistent, kind of like the basic format of, like, if I'm wanting to harness that healing power of autophagy, what does that fasting kind of program structure look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I call it the fasting timeline. So if you're new, you've never fasted before, the very first thing is just every day push your breakfast back an hour or push your dinner up an hour. And just kind of start to get this idea that there's a fasting window and an eating window. So start to elongate that fasting window. After you've done that for about a week, you could probably push the breakfast now back 2 hours. And eventually, within 2 weeks, you'll find that you're intermittent fasting every day. And intermittent fasting is 13 to 15 hours. One of the greatest articles we've seen in the fasting world that to come out is one that came out in the New England Journal of Medicine last December. And they basically stated that they've reviewed over 1,500 peer reviewed journals, and that fasting 13 to 15 hours should be the first line of treatment for neurodegenerative conditions, diabetes, obesity, asthma, chronic pain. They even go in and say pre surgery, pre and post surgery. This is the article to the medical world saying, hey guys, we've looked at the science, 13 to 15 hours looking really promising for a lot of things. And it should be the first line of treatment, which is not happening. So that's the first step is that's the place you want to go to first. Then once you've mastered 13 to 15 hours, you can move into autophagy fasting. And autophagy is what we talked about where you are turning on this intelligence. And that will start about 17 hours and it from the research we have it will continue till about 72 hours. So for those of you that have gone into like 3-day water fasts or 2-day fasts, you're like autophagy just keeps going, going, going until you eat food. So that's kind of the next hurdle. And then the third hurdle that our resetters do that one of my favorite is the 24-hour fast. And at 24 hours, this was an MIT study that came out. It showed that the intestinal stem cells repaired themselves. That you like there was like a reboot of intestinal stem cells, and the whole terrain of the gut changes. So most people in my community are vacillating between 15 hours, 24 hours. Some days they do 13, some days they do 24. This is where it gets really fun and you can sort of be flexible with what you want to do. You have longer fasts, like 48 hours is showing to trigger some really cool genes and turn off some other genes. Dopamine pathways get reboot, like the signaling pathways will reorganize themselves so you can actually be more dopamine sensitive, which will help happiness. And then the Mac Daddy is 72 hours, is Walter Longo's studies on white blood cell regeneration and the whole immune system gets regenerated. But I like to look at it like they're like light switches, like 15 hours you turn this on, 17 hours you turn this on. And so each switch gets turned on until you eat. And then once you eat, all the switches turn off.
I think that that's really well described of kind of like, which benefit, which mechanism am I wanting to ramp up a little bit more? And I like the way that you do that of, starting just by pushing breakfast back a little bit. Because, sometimes when I've spoken about intermittent fasting, I almost describe it as like when I'm going for a run, where it's like, well, I might have like a mile goal or a time goal in my head. And I'm going to push myself. I'm going to push myself outside my comfort zone. And it is kind of that intuition and listening to your body of, if you're really, really hurting, maybe it's time to call it a day. But of course, you don't grow in your comfort zone. So it's always,
Yep.
you're wanting to just keep pushing it. So I think if people are approaching it the way you're suggesting of, continuously pushing that fasting window a little bit longer, a little bit harder. And of course, monitoring basic stuff, whether that's weight or biofeedback or blood work or whatever, because we don't want to like malnourish or,
Yeah.
so actually that'd be a good question too, is what's some of your advice surrounding how do we, push the limits of our fasting to harness these deep properties while still making sure we're getting enough of the nutrients we need to be healthy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is why I like fasting variation. When I first started teaching fasting on YouTube, what I found is so many people were like, I'm a one meal a day person. All I eat is one meal every single day. and they were maybe keto in one meal a day. And then all of a sudden you would hear them say, my hair is falling out and I'm not able to lose weight anymore. And they had pushed it too far. To me, there wasn't enough variation. So we really teach the variation, like, do intermittent fasting 4 days a week, try to stretch it to autophagy fasting 1 day a week, do 1 day a week of maybe could you go to 24 hours and then 1 day a week don't fast. So I really am a fan of going in and out of different fasting cycles. Then when you eat, you got to eat. Like this is the difference between what you said before of like the anorexic who is like, I'm just not, or the person with an eating disorder that's like, I'm just not going to eat because I feel better. And then when they eat, they just eat a little bit. That's not what you do when you do a fasting lifestyle. You use fasting as this incredible tool to be a fat burner. And then when you eat and you make sure you're eating good quality food. So, and as far as vitamins and minerals, there's not, I personally, now I know the carnivore people out there would disagree, but I'm a big fan of lots of lettuces, lots of vegetables, really making sure that you're lots of seeds and nuts because we're a really mineral deficient world right now and our soils are deficient in minerals. So we see mineral deficiencies probably show up in fasting, people who fast more than anything because they already went in with a mineral deficiency because they're eating food that is grown in soils that don't have any minerals. Then they microwave their, let's say it's a broccoli, they microwave their broccoli and they kill any nutrients in it. So yeah, so it's not the fasting that's causing it, it's that you can't carry over that restriction always into the eating window.
Yeah, very good answer. And there's a lot of chatter out there too of um, ketosis being able to trigger and activate autophagy, kind of in a so almost like suggesting that ketosis is almost like a little bit of a silver bullet if we can maybe reap some of the same benefits as fasting without actually fasting. I'd be curious your take on that.
Yeah. So ketosis is interesting because you can stimulate ketosis without fasting. I think it's a little harder, personally, but ketosis is what you're trying to do. Ketones are a sign you're a fat burner, and you're bringing your carb levels down, bringing your fat up so that your blood sugar is either stable or it's dropping a little bit to trigger that effect. So nothing wrong with that. If you add some intermittent fasting in there, you're going to get there a little quicker. Um, but just being in ketosis doesn't stimulate autophagy. It doesn't reboot intestinal stem cells. It may pattern your dopamine pathways. I don't really, I'm not, I haven't seen a lot on that. And all the signaling and turning on of genes and turning off of genes won't happen. So you can get into ketosis with very limited fasting, but you're also missing out on a huge mechanism that all these mechanisms are waiting for you when you take the ketogenic diet and then you start to exercise your fasting muscle. And I think, we call it fat adapted or metabolically flexible. It's the best place to be because you can go without food if food's not there. Like, I don't know if you had this experience, but when the pandemic first hit and like all the lines at the grocery store, I looked at my husband and I was like, well, if we don't get food for a couple of days, I'm going to be okay. We'll figure it out, but it was so comforting to know that my body didn't have to have food all the time to be able to survive. So this metabolic flexibility comes in handy in a lot of places. But you've got to train it like anything else. You got to train your body. And when people go, well, I'm just going to do the ketogenic diet by manipulating my macros, and they don't add fasting in, I think they're missing out on a whole world they could be stimulating.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think it's fasting is much more fundamental than, the million ways that we can overcomplicate our macronutrient ratios and just kind of spin the wheels. And yeah, the metabolic flexibility in, beauty of fasting. It's so convenient. I can't tell you how many
Oh,
times
amazing.
I've been, on work trips at conferences and there's like no food I can eat. I'm just like, well, good thing I've got some body fat. I've got that strong fasting muscle. I'm good to go for a while.
Yep. It's amazing. What used to happen to me before I started fasting is if I would hit a point where I felt a little hangry, I would be like, if I don't get food, I'm going to kill somebody. And now what my thought process is more along the lines of just hang in there. You're going to switch over into ketosis soon, and then the hunger will go away. So you learn to trust your body so
Mhm.
much without food. And that I want everybody to experience that because that's freedom.
Mhm.
But it does take a training to get yourself there.
Yeah, very well said. It is. It's that I think a lot of people have lost trust in their bodies, or sadly, I think a lot of people have never known how to trust their body. They're always kind of
Yep.
feeling like they're fighting against it.
Yep. I always say, like, think of your body like if I came and I like parked a Lamborghini in your driveway and I handed you the keys and I didn't tell you how to take care of it, and you're putting the wrong gas into it and you didn't read the manual, you didn't know all the bells and whistles that it came with, and you just drove it and without any maintenance on it, over time, even a Lamborghini wouldn't really work well. Um, your body's the same way. You were given the same high performing car. It's called your body. You just didn't get the manual. You weren't told what to eat. You didn't know all the bells and whistles it came with. So you're just letting your taste buds control this. And you're using food for dopamine so that you and serotonin so you can feel better. So you reach, but you're not realizing that it's a high performance sports car that when you treat it like that, it's crazy how well you feel.
Oh, absolutely. And on that note, because mental health is kind of my big focal point in fashion, there's all these kind of antidepressant effects of fasting. And I was just reading a paper the other day that was really cool. You'll like this, where they demonstrated how fasting actually inhibited autophagy in certain regions of the brain associated with
Oh,
neuroplasticity, which I know, right? Because you're like,
yeah,
well, wait a
super
second.
interesting.
But
Yeah.
then it's like, well, actually, and they pointed it out. So I wish I had the aha moment organically, but they kind of pointed out of, well, we think that this is probably, an adaptive mechanism in times of nutritional stress. And I was like, well, you know what, golly gee, that makes a lot of sense too. So, maybe some of our tissues are fighting off viruses or infections or whatever, and, doing the cleanup. But in the brain, it's like, well, if we're under nutritional stress and starving, we need to enhance neuroplasticity so we can be quick on our feet and be neurologically adaptive. So I was like, well, that's so amazingly
So
cool.
cool.
So we're doing all of this cleanup, throughout a lot of our body, but then in the brain, it actually helps us learn new things and have a
Yeah.
malleable plastic brain. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. I just was reading some studies on autophagy in the respiratory system, and which would be like the opposite of that, right? Because without food, you'd want your brain to not, the brain doesn't need to be repairing, like you said, but the lungs might need to get a cleanup. So that's really interesting to think that different body parts are stimulating autophagy for different reasons, but this is what we're learning, and this is why we have to change the way we've been doing nutrition. We've got to shift the paradigm because we've we've become more obese, we're less metabolically flexible, and now we're flipping immune compromised. How many more things do we need before the world wakes up to realize that we got to do it on our own and tap into these incredible healing sources?
Oh, absolutely. And so, another thing I was going to ask you is, because I've pondered this a little bit. I always like to think about evolution and, why would that make sense for evolution? So I think about, okay, the male hunter gatherer kind of going out to hunt, and maybe the female kind of gathering around the paleo cave or whatever.
The paleo cave. I
So
love
my
it.
question being, do you feel like there's any difference or major differences in approaching fasting depending on gender, and or kind of part two of what time of the month it is and what your cycle's doing? And does that influence what you
Yep.
would recommend for fasting?
Absolutely, and this is a big part of my message. If you go back to the hunter-gatherer idea, a woman who is about to start her cycle, hasn't totally started it, but the week before, they're not going to pull her out and be like, "Hey, you need to go hunt some meat with us because her job is to rest and let her body get ready for that moment of shedding. There's a different at different times of the month we have different needs. And men don't have that. They are built to be hunter gatherers all the time. So, what we teach is that you fast within your cycle. And day 1 to day 14, usually most people can fast really easily. You can go on a long fast, you can do keto really well. And then day 14, around that moment, you're ovulating. Some women have to step out of fasting around day 14. It really kind of depends. But other women can get away with intermittent fasting and they'll be fine. And then you continue on to day 21, and it's day 21 that's the most dangerous because you need to make progesterone for that uterine lining to shed. And progesterone needs you to have glucose be a little higher, needs a little more insulin, and it needs foods that are very much not a ketogenic diet. So, potatoes and squashes and rice and beans, grass fed meat, which is great, but these are like progesterone building foods. So, what we've seen in our community is that people step into fasting, they love it, and they love the results, and they just do more and more and more of it. And then I start getting messages saying, "I lost my period. I'm spotting all the time. My perimenopause symptoms are through the roof. My hair is falling out." And once we tell them, "Okay, day 21, if you still have a cycle, stop fasting, stop doing keto," that one little simple change can really have an impact on a woman's hormones. And then if you think about once she starts to bleed, it's, our period is a cleansing.
Hmm.
And so you can go ahead and stimulate autophagy, and you can work with the mechanisms at that point. But leading up to that point needs to be more nurturing.
Very well said. Because I saw one of your recent posts about that, and I knew that'd be a good question to ask. So that bio individuality too, and I think this is the beautiful process and journey of not just exploring fasting, but exploring your body, right, and learning
Yeah.
how to get in tune with it. Like it usually is trying to tell you something if
Yeah.
you're listening, right?
Yep. Yeah, and it's so smart. And this is the other thing, we just don't. We're not. We get excited about something, especially in health, and we just keep doing it all the time. Same thing with like Spartan racing or CrossFit. Like a man can go and do those, no problem. He doesn't have to think about his hormonal balance. But you take a 47-year-old woman who's going through perimenopause, and you put her in Spartan races over and over and over again, and you are going to tank her adrenals. So I really feel, I loved what you said, the bio individuality. We really need to go back to finding our path. But all of these concepts are so cool, from fasting to keto to carnivore to ice plunges to all the different things that we're doing. But have we stopped as women to stop and go, okay, where does this fit in my cycle? Because ultimately, there I am designed to have a baby, and I am designed to be in a rest period every 28 days.
Mhm.
So I've been trying to help women see that there's a time to fast and a time not to fast. And it's also freeing because when you get to eat all those yummy foods, it's a fun. And then once your period starts, you can start fasting again. It really works nicely.
Very good. Well, and you mentioned exercise too, with it's really there's a lot of cool science there of what kind of training is better suited for men's physiology versus women's. But and I know I see you working out all the time on your Instagram
I
story.
do.
So I'd be curious, how do you or approach or recommend kind of modulating your exercise routine, in conjunction, like around your fasting? How do the fasting and the exercise, like a little
Go
bit
ahead.
more
Yep.
rest, or what does that look like?
Yeah. So let me back up one step and say, at 40 for a woman, she has to realize that her ovaries are like on a slow decline. They're
Mhm.
like, I'm done. I'm not going to make progesterone, estrogen, testosterone anymore. I'm just going to take it. It's going to take me about 10, 15 years. I'll stop producing those hormones, but I'm going to hand it over to the adrenal glands, and the adrenals are going to start to make those hormones. And this is what gets the rushing woman, the over-exercise woman in trouble every single time. And I'm speaking as somebody who was that woman.
Yeah.
So what I've had to learn the hard way was that I need exercise variation. And so I used to go on marathon runs, and now I go on 30-minute runs, and I hike, and I do yoga, and I do HIIT training. We just got I don't know if you know what the Carol bike is, but
Mm.
it's a HIIT training bike we just got in the house. So I'm really big on exercise variation for women over 40. You can't do the hardcore exercise all the time. When it comes to fasting, this question shows up all the time. That intermittent fasting, you can exercise when you want, ever you want. Autophagy fasting, 17 hours, 24 hours, fine. But when you start to get into these longer fasts, if you're pushing yourself and exercising hard, you're damaging your body more than helping it. Think of the longer fasts as you're honoring that there's an intelligence inside your body, and it's going to start to repair. And if you start pushing cortisol levels up, if you start really overdoing it, that intelligence is not going to necessarily work in your favor. And so we really emphasize short fasts, great, do whatever you want. Long fasts, really go for a hike or a walk, do yoga, but don't push your exercise. And that goes for both sexes.
Okay. Okay. Makes a lot of sense. And certainly just listening to your body, what is your body calling for? Which I love the mindfulness that yoga can teach us of honor your body where it's at. And there's like you're saying, there's a time to push yourself. And then there's a time to honor what your body is really calling for. And this is where like I think journaling can be so powerful of how you're feeling throughout your fast or what you notice when you do this exercise or that, and then tracking your cycle and seeing how all of that, what's the story that all of this information is kind of trying to tell us.
Yeah. It's I think, and I'm curious if you see this too. I think everybody's just like, I get this question all the time, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you have to tell me what you're trying to accomplish with your health before I can tell you what to do. And I think that's the problem that we have is like somebody goes to a new exercise class and they're like, "Oh my god, core power yoga is amazing and I should go in and sweat like a maniac every single day." And we don't stop and go, what are the needs of my body? Where's my life at? How do I create some variation here? So we kind of chunk it down into there's a variation to fasting, there's a variation to your diet, and there's a variation to exercise. And if it gets really fun, because then it never gets boring, and you can always move in and out of these different states. And I think that's what metabolic flexibility is. It's not metabolic rigidity, it's metabolic flexibility, which means you can go in and out of states of high demand for exercise and no exercise or low demand. That's the flexibility that we need to create with people's lifestyle. It'll
Exactly.
have a huge impact.
Flexibility and developing the resilience with it, right? There's
Yep.
something kind of beautifully spiritual about I mean, pushing yourself in the gym or exercise, but also like when you're fasting. I definitely know from a lot of my experiences, it brings you kind of closer to yourself and closer
Yeah.
to that source that we all need to be connected to.
Yeah. Yeah, I have so much. I feel like I know my body better than I ever have
Hmm.
once I applied these principles. And I don't get caught up in the trendy headlines of, this fast is for weight loss or this one's not. I just know what works well for me because I've been doing it for a while and I've been clued in. So, like, I saw an article that I don't know if you saw this. It came out from Stanford and it was about a month ago, and it was a researcher that said he spent 3 years analyzing intermittent fasting. And he has discovered, based off his research, that intermittent fasting is not helpful for weight loss. And I'm like, okay, wait, this makes no sense because I have 300,000 resetters across all my platforms that fast all the time, and the stories are amazing. So I dove into his science, and in his subject group, he compared everything from 18-year-old men up to 65-year-old women, and they were all lumped into the study together. And he didn't change what they ate. he just looked at the intermittent fasting like time period. And it was so erroneous because we can't compare an 18-year-old man to a 65-year-old woman. We have to go back to this individual. What are our individual needs? And it's going to be hard. It's not, you're not going to be spoon fed. So you got it. But that's okay because that's why it's an art and you learn to practice it over time.
Absolutely. Well, and one that, getting educational guidance from somebody like yourself. So, as we begin wrapping up, I know you have a lot of platforms. You've got the Resetter podcast and communities. Could you break down, where can people learn from you and join your community? So that way they're not, in it alone or trying to figure it
Yeah.
all out alone, because there's obviously a lot of people that have, already done this work and are experts in it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to fast with us, we do once a month. We do what we call a fast training week. It's actually 5 days, and I teach different types of fast or fasts or people who want to know how to do a 3 day, 5 day water fast. We'll coach them through there, but it's it's in a more of a public platform. It's free. It's on Facebook. It's called the Resetter Collaborative. I know a lot of people are on Facebook, and so we also do it on my YouTube channel. So if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, we are now doing videos every day over there to lead people through it. So that's free. And then I have a membership group, Low Cost Academy group, where we do Zoom calls, kind of like this, twice a month. We do workouts every Saturday morning, and then every other month we do what I call a reset, where I take people through a 15-day experience of different fasts and different eating styles so they can discover for them what style works best. And then, but they're being coached by me and I've got a set of reset guides, and we're all in a community together working out or working these principles out and making sure that everybody finds their own path. So when I got this message from the Aboriginal tribe in Australia, it really hit me the impact social media can make on people you don't even know. And it also made me realize that there was a need for something low cost for people. And so that's what our academy is we really try to keep that cost down and over deliver so people can work these principles out.
I love hearing this kind of stuff, because certainly I'm doing my own thing trying to help people, and that's something I'm really passionate about. I kind of always tease, like, functional medicine isn't very functional if nobody can afford it, and I worry and
Super true.
fear about functional medicine stuff kind of being like a luxury good, or I feel like health in general is kind of like a luxury good, and it's like we cannot afford, as a society, as a collective, as a species, we can't afford for this to be an exclusive luxury good. So we
Agreed.
need to be, working together as a community. There's so much healing power from a sense of community and working together. So I'm so
Yep.
inspired by the work that you're doing,
Thank
and
you.
we'll absolutely include, all the links and everything so people can easily find you and join you for future resets. I'll hop in there too. That'd be fun. I need to
It's
learn
really
more.
fun. It's a
Yeah.
really good because people like it. Like some people, we're in one right now. Tomorrow is the water fast day, so we're already getting messages. We take people through a 36-hour water fast. But people are like, "Oh my God, my joint pain went away when I did carnivore." We'll have take them, and then we have vegan options. So we kind of try to go to everybody's whatever their eating style is. And then we have like long fasts and short fasts, and every couple of days you're doing something different. So before you know it, the 15 days are up. Everybody loses weight, and everybody has a positive experience, some more than others, but everybody walks away and goes, "Oh my God, I get it. I get what I'm supposed to do." And it's really fun.
It's like a fasting metabolic flexibility boot camp or something,
Yeah, there you go. There you go. It's like a boot camp that goes for 15 days. Yep,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
amazing. So, Dr. Mindy, it's really such a pleasure, such an honor. Like, I love your energy. I love your work. There's such a depth and expansiveness to your knowledge, but then you're able to deliver it in such a practical, functional way. So it really has just been such a great opportunity to get to talk to you. I really hope that when the world turns back on, our paths cross and
Me
we can
too.
hang in person.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, agreed. I've enjoyed both of our conversations now. So, and you're doing amazing. I follow you on Instagram too. I mean, you're doing incredible education. And like we talked on the Resetter podcast, I just feel like we need to unite as health practitioners. I'm
Mhm.
so tired of the divisiveness that the world has taken. In fact, in my studies of autophagy this week, it shows that resentment and shame and guilt and bitterness actually shuts autophagy off.
Hmm.
So we need to be in a moment where we're embracing each other's differences and working together. So, and you're on the front lines of doing that in the health world. So thank you.
I appreciate that. It's the remedy to polarization is unity. So the when we have these types of conversations, we can get all of these minds together. We're all working towards the same collective goals. So thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. I'm sure we'll
Thank
talk
you.
soon.
We will.
Uh,
We will.
we're
Thank you,
always
Brendan.
collaborating on Facebook and Instagram and whatnot. So thank you again.
Uh-huh. Awesome.
All right. Have a beautiful day. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks, you
Bye.
too. Bye.